To say that this is a juicy episode would probably be an understatement. I have spent way too many hours online with asking my TLP community about their thoughts and opinions on this matter. I've gone onto Instagram and asked my audience their thoughts on this matter. We here at the Legal Page serve thousands of photographers. So this is really an issue dealing with our target market. I am also a retired wedding photographer, so I have my own opinions on this. And TikTok went crazy last week. Like, it was the biggest kerfuffle I've ever seen with a client and their photographer. And if you don't know what it's called Sepiagate. Let me get into what actually happened. So I'll give you the rundown of the incessant videos that went online on TikTok from this client, photographers' reactions, other clients' reactions, lay people's reactions, so many opinions. And then I'm going to talk about the bigger picture stuff. What is really going on? Honestly, it's customer service versus the art and the artistic style of a photographer and the copyrighted works of a photographer and the raw files of a photographer and business practices of a photographer. All of that balanced with customer service. We're going to get into that. Then we're going to go through some legal Q&A regarding what people have been asking me, such as, is this slander and defamation? What do I do with my artistic style clause? How do I convey that correctly to my clients? What other clauses do I need to have in my contracts? Is it legally okay to not give raw photos to clients if they ask and you end up in a legal dispute like this? And really the best practices moving forward. So at the end of this episode, I'm going to talk about, here's the silver lining here. A lot of times when things like this go down and a big blow up occurs online, of course, I think there's a little bit of cancel culture going on here. And I don't think this was the appropriate way to go about it. But alas, this is what we got. And what can we learn? What can we learn as a wedding industry? What can we learn as photographers moving forward? How can we try to avoid this situation with any of our future clients? Okay, so let's start off with what happened. I am going to go through this as quickly as possible with notes that I've written down because I could go off on tangents here and I just don't think that is appropriate and is not necessarily what you want to listen to. So if you don't know what Sepiagate is, let me explain. A client, a bride, was unhappy with the editing of her wedding photos, not the photography itself. So not the composition, the posing, the documentary style, none of that. She was okay with how the photos were taken. She just wasn't happy with kind of the warm orange, yellow tones, dark and moody a little bit more. It was all about the yellow tones. Note, the clients did like their rehearsal photos. She only didn't like the day of wedding photos and how the photographer delivered the edited images. So the crux of the matter is the client, and I'm going to get into this in a second, did have some back and forth with the wedding photographer. There's a lot that happened in the middle that we don't know what the actual facts are. We are only seeing one side of the story here from the client then getting to the point at which she was so frustrated and didn't truly get her way that then she went on TikTok and posted 20, almost 30 plus videos of this whole situation. And in those videos, the client is calling this editing style sepia and is saying this is just like a sepia edit. And they just, plastered this preset onto my photos. I don't like them. She didn't edit them. She didn't take any of my feedback. And she kept saying the word sepia. So the internet coined it Sepiagate. I want to note here that I did go look up and did some digging on the phonetic pronunciation of sepia. And it is indeed sepia, not sepia. I think this bride kept referring to it as sepia in all of her TikTok videos. And I also went and polled my Instagram audience because I was just genuinely curious. Do you guys all pronounce it sepia or sepia? I've always said sepia. And 52% of my audience said that it was pronounced sepia. 48% said sepia. So there's confusion here on how to just even pronounce the term sepia. I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be calling it sepia throughout the rest of this episode. Okay, back to the facts. So the client did talk to the photographer about her concerns with the editing. And we have factual evidence regarding this because now the client has posted all of the text message strings between her and the photographer on TikTok at like video 30. So we do know that this did go down, and the client does recognize this and gives credit where credit is due regarding what happened between her and the photographer. So the client messaged the photographer within, I would say, a day or two after delivery of the wedding gallery. And then this back and forth occurred regarding, hey, I don't like this edit. I don't like this, warm tone on my hair. I don't like this on my teeth. I don't like the contouring of my makeup. It's looking way too dark and saturated. And of course, from a bride's standpoint, if you are working really hard to make your teeth super white for your wedding day, you want your teeth to look white and not yellow. I thought that was a legitimate editing error on the photographer's part, but they're just minor tweaks that this gal was initially asking for. And then it seemed like the photographer was willing to edit a few things to ensure that the client was happy. The photographer even gave a few raw photos to the client so that she could edit them herself. And then this is really where the debacle culminates. So as the photographer is giving a couple of raws, I think the client realized, oh, the photographer is willing to give me raws. I just want all of them. And the photographer then stood her ground and said, I'm not willing to give you all of the raws without a fee. But the photographer did allow the client to purchase the entire gallery of raws for $4,000. I think the client initially paid this photographer around $8,000. And she talks about this in the video. Like, I've already paid this amount for a destination wedding, mind you. That's like 3 days of a photographer's time. That's actually not that expensive in the photography world. But I digress here. The photographer said, sure, I'll give you all of the raws for this fee. $4,000. Not unreasonable, not unheard of, actually a pretty inexpensive price for raw, unedited images. The client then begged this photographer to just give her all of the raws for free with an NDA being signed. So a non-disclosure agreement, meaning I'm not going to do anything else with these unedited images other than edit them to my liking and use them for my own personal wedding album, my own personal use. She wasn't then going to go sell these unedited raws to third parties. So kind of a legitimate compromise here that the client was requesting. But again, it's up to the photographer whether or not they're still going to give those raw photos for free with an NDA signed. And this photographer said, no, she stood her ground. I am happy to give them to you, but for a fee. So then the client proceeds on TikTok with 20 plus videos regarding her stance. And clients and the wedding industry start chiming in, giving their opinions on this. There's absolutely a difference of opinion surrounding whether or not the photographer's style in her portfolio was the same or at least similar enough to the edited images from the wedding day. Most photographers, though, agree that this photographer's editing style is very, very similar, of warm, more orangey tones. And the client should have known what she was getting if she just briefly looks at her Instagram account and website. And the client, though, never ever named the photographer in any of the TikToks. So that's important to know. And the photographer has not actually posted her public stance on this. So she hasn't posted any videos. The only thing that this photographer has done, which I found just endearing, was a clapback on TikTok, and she changed her profile to say that Sepia photographer. I'm like, you go, girl. Way to own it. I'm dead. It was just so, so good. But here's the kicker. This went down on TikTok, which can go way more viral and does go way more viral than any other social media platform. And the comments and the opinions of lay people in the wedding industry and photographers and other clients who have had bad experiences with their photographers or wedding vendors, it went crazy bananas. Like, I've never seen something go so viral so fast, and everyone jumped to their own opinions on it as quickly as this has in terms of the photography industry. Everyone obviously has their own stance on whether or not they are siding more with the photographer, more with the client. I think it's truly 50-50 if you go look at all of the comments on all of the videos now. I think that this particular bride is now getting so much bad commentary and pushback on it that she did turn off comments. So you can no longer see the comments on a lot of the first, 3 to 5 videos that she posted that went viral. I think her comments are still on for some of the other videos, but now there's so many videos from other people in the industry, business coaches, photography coaches, wedding photographers who had similar interactions with clients and how they dealt with it and what their opinion is. And then there's comments on all of those videos. I mean, you can go down a rabbit hole right now on TikTok. I don't suggest you do that. Hopefully you just take my facts as what they are. I'm trying to be somewhat as unbiased as I can be. I think you're catching my drift here on where I stand in terms of siding with the photography community. And here's really why. The bride gives off massive toxic energy to me. She made a TikTok video or videos that went viral. Even after all of these videos, she said, this is going to be the last time that I comment on this. And then she kept going. It was like she was hooking on to the virality of this situation and probably enjoyed the fact that other people were agreeing with her. So emotionally, she was feeling a bit validated. So she kept posting more and more. But it felt like mean girl bashing to me. And I'm just not okay with that. It went from her kind of trying to educate other potential clients that are working with wedding photographers on what to look out for and maybe how to interact with your photographer to make sure that they're the right fit, to then being so negative and just cutting down this photographer, even though they weren't saying the name. I mean, the internet did their job and clearly found out who this photographer was. I feel bad for this photographer right now. I did reach out to the photographer. I know who it was. And I just asked in DMs, hey, I know you're going through a lot. You can totally say no if you aren't okay with this, but if there's any way I could get a copy of your contract, and mainly this was just for education purposes. I just wanted to compare, okay, what was in her contract so that I could effectively tell all of you here on this podcast episode, all right, here are some of the issues that I'm seeing in this contract. Here is what I would suggest you put in the contract. I was never going to share the contract language. I just thought that it would be helpful in this discussion. Alas, I didn't hear back from her. Totally okay. No hard feelings at all. I do think that this photographer is finally going to give a public statement on an exclusive interview with the Vendor Table podcast. So please look out for that. I'll make sure to tag it on my Instagram and put it in these show notes because I love their podcast and I think that there's going to be really good insight there. But back to the actual personality of this client. I don't like how she went about this. And I think a lot of us can see right through what was going down. When all of this was happening, in real time on TikTok, I was watching it. And then I was actually at our lake cabin with my family, and a friend from college who was here visiting has nothing to do with the wedding industry and the online industry whatsoever. And I was showing my mom and my husband and my friend these videos, and they felt the same way. They're like, ooh, this is giving mean girl vibes. Ooh, I don't like her tonality here. Ooh, she kind of seems like a nightmare bridezilla client. And I don't want to label anyone, but for a lot of us that have photographed a lot of different clients, we know what it's like to just have someone who is unhappy. And there's a lot of times that you just can't win. You can't win with those types of clients. And that's really what it seems like here. The photographer wasn't unreasonable. We're going to get into that with the customer service. But the facts of the matter are this bride just went ham on TikTok with so many videos. It could have probably been resolved beforehand. It could have been resolved without going and bashing people online. And now it's really interesting because the bride has since come back after about a week now And she's gotten a lot of negative publicity surrounding this. I think she's happy with some of the things she said and some of the comments she's receiving. But once you go viral and you get a ton of negative and hatred online, you just can't come back from that. And then this week she went and reposted all of the text message thread between her and the photographer to show like evidence and proof that like I was really kind in the initial interactions with this photographer, but the photographer wasn't being reasonable. I don't agree. You can just read those text messages and the photographer is being absolutely reasonable. Maybe she's not doing exactly what you want as the client, but it's her business and her prerogative to respond the way that she sees fit, as long as it's not unkind or completely out of the norm of what industry standard would be here. The client really just was trying to go backwards and show I am a kind person and this is how I first interacted with the photographer. Like I'm not crazy here. I'm not like trying to just spew things online with no basis in what I'm saying. But that doesn't negate the fact that you went on an incessant rant online and people can see right through the videos. Everyone did in the photography world, in my opinion. You can go from kind human to nightmare client super quickly, and that shows your true colors. Don't try to defend yourself that you're a nice person. Honestly, the internet has seen right through you. So that is where we stand right now with the facts as of July 2nd, 2024, about a week into this whole TikTok viral video situation that then, spewed into Facebook groups and spewed into Instagram, and everyone in the wedding industry and photography industry in particular know about it. I want to talk more generally about this situation now. So the biggest debacle in the photography industry is truly, should you uphold customer service or your business practices and your contract? Which one should be favored here? It's truly at the heart of this. Are you a service provider first or are you an artist first? And that is where there is just a wide variety of opinions. And if you take anything from listening to this podcast episode, if you are a photographer or a service provider, specifically in the wedding and event industry, which is high emotions, high stakes, clients are probably not their absolute best at all times, you have to decide whether your service provider side is going to come first, your artistry side is going to come first, balancing that with your business practices and upholding your contracts. I cannot tell you how to act. I can tell you my perspective on this. You can listen to all of the TikToks on this matter and go down a rabbit hole. You can listen to other podcasts on this subject. But at the core of entrepreneurship is you are going to run your business differently than your colleague down the street. You may have approached and resolved this situation differently than 5 other people that you love and respect, and you think that their photography is amazing and they're just these beautiful genius artists. Maybe you would have done it a bit differently because you approach customer service differently. And that's no better or worse depending on how you would do this. To this point, an industry thought leader, Maddie May of Adventure Instead, commented on the legal Paige community's big, massive thread on this Sepiagate situation. And I really like what she said. She said, when defending our art gets in the way of being a good service provider, in my opinion, that's backwards. Solid point here. And now I want to read exactly what she said in this thread, because I think it is a very, very good perspective on this situation. And then I'm going to give you the opposite side on the other hand. So she went on to say, yes, clients hire us for a specific style, and we're artists in a way, but not in the same way that a fine art painter is. We aren't just out there making photos we like and then selling them afterwards. No, as wedding photographers, we are being commissioned to create art that our clients are happy with. They're paying us so that they get images that they're happy with. If a client isn't happy, defending ourselves by saying, well, this is my art, isn't a great defense if you want to prevent bad reviews. Yes, this client clearly made a mistake in thinking that she liked the warm editing style and then had regrets, and that mistake is on her. But this happens sometimes. And we all know this in the wedding industry. A lot of times clients have buyer's remorse and they're just like not happy with the vendor's delivered product. Then she goes on to say clients aren't professional photographers and they do make mistakes. And when this happens in very rare cases, I don't really get why the simple solution of just edit them a bit differently to make the client happy is such an unpopular opinion. She says, I have my own wedding style and I've won plenty of awards for my art, but I would never put my artistic ego and pride above making an individual client happy, especially one that was an avid TikToker and was threatening to give bad reviews. She said, in 14 years of professional photography, I think I've had 3 couples who have ever wanted colors adjusted in their edits, things like a suit color or bridesmaid dresses or makeup that wasn't showing up how they imagined. And I just sucked it up and got the photos edited the way the client wanted. Does this make me less of an artist and more of a sellout? Yes. And I'm 100% fine with that. This perspective is good. And I would say, less than 50% of photographers agree with her on this. I understand where being a service provider and providing the best customer service is paramount. But in this situation, I think there is much more that has not been publicly explained online, and that messy middle is what I'm going to call it. The bride has posted what the interactions were with DMs when she was first viewing the wedding gallery, and how she didn't like the warm tones and the edits, and she was giving feedback to the photographer. I think the photographer was playing ball with her at the beginning and saying, okay, I understand you're not happy. Here are some raw files. Let me edit these. I think the photographer first tried to edit the photos, and then the client was still unhappy. And then she gave her raws, but then the client was still unhappy. It was one of those like situations where you really get a gut feeling as a service provider, like they're quite possibly may not be anything I can do to make this client 100% happy here. So let's talk about the other side of this. On the other hand, this client paid $8,000 plus for a photographer, signed the photographer's contract, viewed the photographer's portfolio. She has even acknowledged that and taken responsibility for doing that and probably not viewing enough of the photographer's portfolio. And she's bound by the contract that she signed. Not to mention, the photographer has every right to do what she feels is best practice for her business. It's her business. It's not the client's business. It's her business. And if you've listened to any of my legal education at all for the photography world, it's that I always want you as the business owner to make sure that your client is actually reading the contract. We get so used to just sending contracts and your clients then just sign contracts online. They scroll to the bottom. They don't even look through it. Clients here can learn a lot from this situation. They need to talk with their vendors more. They need to make sure that they are 1,000% comfortable in signing onto an $8,000 contract with someone. At the very beginning, before you even book with this particular vendor, you as a client need to explain your concerns. And if you have a feeling that you may want raw photos, you probably need to ask the photographer, or say you hire a videographer and you want the raw footage so that you can edit it to your liking. You need to explain that to your vendors beforehand so that the vendors can then go tell you, yes, I will offer that. It's for an additional fee, or we can talk about that later, leaving it more open-ended, or no, my business practices, I do not give out any of the raw photos or footage. In this respect, someone said this, and I really loved it. You as the client, though, have to bring the correct energy to the conversation because no one will feel like accommodating an asshole. Yeah, true here. You have to still be a polite, kind, normal human when you're interacting with vendors. Like I said, I think there's this middle situation that we all don't know what really went down and how bad this bride probably interacted with this particular photographer, because all of us have been in a situation where we then put our foot down and we hold our ground and we hold to our contract. And as a lawyer, I'm like, that is 100% fine here. No reasonable judge or arbiter is going to look at this and say that there was any breach of contract. You delivered and performed your services to the utmost of your abilities. There was no issue here. It's just a dislike for the editing style and the artistic style of the photographer, which we haven't even talked about having an artistic style clause in the contract. And I bet this photographer had that. Otherwise, there probably would have been more commentary on that online. And there hasn't been. I'm going to get to that in a second. And not to mention, the photographer gave the option to the clients to buy the raw photos for $4,000. She had every right and prerogative to ask for additional compensation for the raw photos. Those weren't included in the wedding package and certainly were probably outlined as such in the contract. And from my lawyer's perspective, after drafting custom contracts in photography for clients who want raw photos, that is a steal of a deal. They are in the tens of thousands of dollars to sign an NDA and get raw photos from a photographer. Photographers will give them out, but for a fee. It's like if you bought a Bentley and you signed the contract and took the Bentley off the lot, and you really liked this, say, white pearl Bentley, okay? And then when you got home, you start really looking at the car and you're like, that's not the color I actually wanted. I think I want a black car. I want a black Bentley. You can't then just go back to the dealership and be like, paint this car black for free. They will happily do it and they will probably provide you with a little bit extra and over deliver, but they're going to get paid a service fee for painting the Bentley black. To me, this is very, very similar. The client knew what she was getting. The photographer's portfolio is very, very consistent. And maybe the client didn't know, okay, the editing could be just a little bit different on like an overcast day. Maybe it's going to look different than my rehearsal dinner photos. I think there is a little bit of wiggle room here for the photographer to have done some additional edits. Like the client pointed out, okay, on my wedding rehearsal photos, we have a destination wedding. It's on the beach. There should be blue ocean out there. And she saw that in the rehearsal photos. And then the day of, because it's overcast and different lighting and with the editing style and probably just a quick batch edit from the photographer, not looking very, very specifically at every single photo. And that's kind of what the client was pointing out here, that the ocean in her wedding photos, like at the ceremony, was white. It wasn't actually blue. There's some very minor tweaks that the photographer could have done. And all we know is from the client's perspective, the photographer didn't do this. I would venture to guess that the photographer offered to do this, and maybe for a slight fee, because now the client wants hundreds of photos edited, and that's going to be additional time. This is where everyone disagrees here. Like, just spend the time, make the client happy. Then the client wouldn't have gone on TikTok and done all of this. Who knows? You could have done that and the client still wouldn't have been happy because you didn't then deliver the raw photos. I don't think that this photographer was out of line for sticking to her contract. I will always side with a service provider sticking to their contract. Would I have done this a bit differently, though, from a photographer's standpoint? Maybe. I probably would have edited a bit more. I think the issue is the delivering of raw photos. It was like this, I'm going to hand you one thing and then the client's going to want 15 million things in return. So you give one thing for free and they're like, oh, they're willing to give this for free. I'm going to ask for, the mountaintop of freeness. And that's where I go back to the bride was high maintenance. It's just so clear that this was a high maintenance client. Not to say that high maintenance clients aren't just the part of doing business in the wedding industry. Why would you become a photographer in the wedding industry, the elopement industry, if you don't know that sometimes you're going to have bad apples or high maintenance clients? But you need to know how to deal with them as a photographer. And you need to decide, ultimately, let's wrap this point up here, whether or not customer service for you is first and foremost, like Maddie May of Adventure Instead says, and other photographers in the industry that agree with that type of sentiment, or whether or not you are on the side of, I will help you. I will be a good service provider. I will provide good customer service up to a point. And at that point, then I need to stand my ground. I have a contract. I am a professional here too, and you need to respect me. And if you can't tell, that's where I side. I really like what a TLP community member said on this. Quote, I had to learn a few years ago that I can't make every client happy. Sometimes there's lemons, and to not take that personal. It is so, so hard as business owners to not take things personally and to step back and realize, okay, this is my contract. Why would I have a client sign a contract if I'm not going to uphold my contract? Maybe I'll give some wiggle room, but at the end of the day, that's my foundation. That is where I am standing on my 2 feet. And you have to do all of that with the fear of potentially getting bad publicity online. Whether that's they go online as a client and do viral TikToks, or they give you a 1-star review on Google. It's kind of the cost of doing business nowadays. And you just have to be prepared for that. You can absolutely respond when there are negative things or untrue things said about you online and give your side of the story. But you can't prevent clients from saying their truth online. And here it really was the client's truth, just maybe with a little bit of a bad tone to it. Myself and other industry friends agree that a lot of the TikToks could have been avoided if you just made a few additional edits and tweaking to the clients. Maybe you had given some raws in exchange for an NDA. I probably would have taken that deal if I was the photographer, but it doesn't mean that this photographer has to take that deal. And ultimately, cancel culture is just out of control online on this thing, this smartphone that you can just scroll and you can sit behind a screen and you can just spew hate and you can just cancel the crap out of people. Whether that's for a good reason or not, I think absolutely there is a time and a place for cancel culture in a respectable way, whether that's racism or sexism, anything along those lines. But when it's something like this, petty and trivial in my opinion, editing style could have been resolved by not going viral on TikTok. But that's the day and age we live in. So if you're in the online industry, the wedding industry, the photography industry, you need to buckle up. You need to know that this is a reality you're probably going to face. Bad reviews from clients, negative or false comments said about you online, or just someone else's truth and not your own truth. Maybe not prima facie falsity. I'm going to get to that with defamation and slander here. But you have to be ready for this in today's day and age and all of the social media platforms that we have that people can just go online and do their thing. Now, I want to get into some of the legal questions that people have been asking me regarding this particular subject. So where should you have something regarding raw photos in your contracts? Photographers are really in 2 boats here regarding raw photos. Some believe that your contracts should absolutely be clear about delivering them, and some are okay with doing so for a fee or without a fee. I side with having this term in your contract as the foundation and then taking each individual client situation as its own. You can absolutely waive a provision in your contract, such as not delivering raw photos, and then you deliver raw photos to a client. Again, you need to make sure that you have what's called a severability and no waiver clause at the end of your contract. That's general provision section where it says, if I waive one or more clauses in my contract, it doesn't mean that the entire contract is invalid. I'm just crossing out that particular line in the contract. And that's what you should do from my legal perspective. You need that solid foundation, and then you can decide, okay, if a debacle ensues, how am I going to approach this and negotiate with my clients to come to like a mutually beneficial resolution here. I find it really interesting that there was this massive debate online about raw photos. A lot of people are saying that clients don't understand raw photos, and then a lot of people are saying, yes, they do. They're not some mythical creature, and photographers are like holding on to raw photos. Like, why can't you just give those out to people? This is where I absolutely side with photographers. The raw photos are like the basic bare bones of your artistic work. They're not the final work that you deliver to somebody. Raw images are not JPEGs. And if you wanted unedited raw images, they are a different file. They are .raws, not .jpegs. If you wanted the raws, then you needed to ask that of the photographer prior to you signing the contract with them. Or you as the client need to read the contract and understand, oh, they will give raw photos for an additional fee, or this is going to be an uphill battle for me to get raw photos. Maybe if I don't like the editing style later down the road, I could actually pay for the raw photos. No professional photographer should be giving away raw photos for free. That's like giving away the first draft of your book or the outline or the sketch before the finished painting. The art is the edit too. So when you have issues with raw photos and delivery of raw photos, or whether you give them with clients, you have to tread water carefully because you need to first figure out where your clients are coming from, what they understand with raw photos, what your position is as a photographer with raw photos, and then hopefully come to an agreement with your client where it doesn't escalate to viral videos on TikTok. People also ask me, legally, is it okay to not give raw photos? Absolutely. And we have this in all of our legal page contract templates for photographers. Raw photos are your copyrighted beginning works of art, and you own the right to decide what to do with them. So just because your friend disagrees with you that they are okay with giving away the raws and you're not, doesn't mean legally that you have to agree with them. And the biggest legal question of all that I've been asked is this defamation? Is this slander? At what point with clients going online and spreading a bunch of maybe falsity, maybe their opinions, but then it getting to this extent, what is the line for defamation and slander and what isn't? I did a bunch of research on this. I know a decent amount about defamation and slander, but I don't know everything. And so from a lawyer's perspective, I want to be very careful with how I answer this. So here are my notes on this, and let's go through them. Likely, no, this is not defamation, but my lawyer answer here, it depends. Of course, one has the right to free speech under the Constitution, right? But an exception to this, an exception to free speech, is defamatory speech. Now, online defamation, also known as cyber libel or internet defamation, is the publication of false statements about a person online that damages their reputation. This can include posts, videos, tweets, or comments on social media platforms. So you can have defamation occur on TikTok. But to meet the legal standard of defamation, you have to prove all four elements to have an actionable case in court. Here are the four elements. 1, it has to be published or shared by a third party. The statement has to be false. It has to be presented as fact and not opinion. And it has to cause harm to the subject's reputation. So any false statement of fact that damages someone's reputation that is shared on social media can potentially qualify as defamation, but the key is proving all four of the essential elements. And I did want to note here that the Communications Decency Act, which is a federal law, blocks liability for internet service providers or host platforms in most situations. You can't bring in TikTok as a co-defendant here or a co-plaintiff. My immediate lawyer reaction to this is one would be absolutely hard-pressed to prove the falsity of the client's viral TikToks. This gal's statements online seem to be her truth. And unless the photographer in question can prove that what she is saying is 100% false, based on maybe email interactions, DMs, texts, her putting out the evidence and proof that she has, then you cannot prove a prima facie case for defamation here, libel or slander. It's also extremely difficult to prove this element, and that's why a lot of cases don't go to court. It's not that it's a complete impossibility, as we saw in the Johnny Depp trial, but it's just very, very difficult to get to the place where you're like, yep, this is Fact of the matter, false. But as I did more legal research over the past couple of days, I found a really good article on the online world and social media and defamation, and I wanted to share some excerpts with you. This article said, in an environment where social media users are viewed as more free-willing or careless when speaking, the lines are blurred even further, and it becomes nearly impossible to distinguish opinions from factual statements during the falsity analysis under a defamation case. And this is where the article then goes into courts really agree or disagree with how to approach the interpretation of falsity. And New York courts really have case precedent on one side of this, and then like California courts have another side and interpretation analysis. So New York courts have mainly found that social media speech is akin to hyperbole or opinion, which would not fall under traditional defamation interpretation. Thus, if you're blasting things on social media, but you are still telling your truth, and it's really just opinions, not facts, it's pure hyperbole, it does not constitute defamation, since that is considered per se hyperbole according to courts. And remember, hyperbole here means exaggerated statements or claims not meant to be taken literally. I think we have an issue here of, is it being taken literally or is it just pure opinion? I think there's a lot of opinion in this particular case that we're talking about. But one of the cases that came out of New York in 2020, a judge stated, quote, if the internet is akin to the Wild West, Twitter is perhaps the shooting gallery where verbal gunslingers engage in prolonged hyperbolic crossfire. And this crossfire then blurs the line between fact and opinion, whether it happens on Twitter, online bulletin boards, or even over email. So courts also point to the argumentative and heated nature of social media debate as another reason to believe that statements are per se opinion and not factual claims. Now, the strongest pronouncement in case law that we have that social media speech is per se opinion and not under a true defamation analysis is the 2017 case Jacobus versus Trump. This is where the almost campaign director of Trump, who applied for a campaign position, then went through kind of an interview process and didn't get the position. This person then criticized then candidate Trump on television, and then consequently Trump published a series of tweets on Twitter. If you don't remember this, it did go down in 2017. And he claimed that this particular person begged his campaign for a job and that she went hostile after being turned down twice for the position. And as a result, then this Jacobus gal faced vile personal attacks by Trump's numerous Twitter followers. And then in response, she filed a defamation suit against Trump and claimed that his tweets cost her professional opportunities and injured her reputation as a political commentator. But this case law from New York is one to take note of. Ultimately, what you say on social media is per se opinion and can't be considered defamation. So if we go back to the elements of a true defamation claim, published or shared with a third party online, that's a check mark. Falsity, you're going to also have an uphill battle with proving that the statements made online are in fact false and providing evidence and proof to that. And then the third prong, which is presented as fact and not opinion, that is really where courts differ here. Is it opinion? Is it merely opinion? And then if there's a comment string on other people's opinions, like this really isn't fact-based. And so we can't actually analyze this as a defamation claim. And then fourth, you still have to prove that your reputation was harmed. You have to prove actual damages, that you lost XYZ amount of clients and money due to someone defaming you online. So that's New York courts and what a lot of New York case precedent is saying. Other courts, particularly those in California, treat social media speech no differently than traditional media statements. No surprise here that it's coming from California, and then maybe the trickle-down effect will go through other states and maybe other federal jurisdictions and will go through other states and federal jurisdictions and circuits. And those focus primarily on three characteristics of social media speech in determining liability. So one, a serious tone; two, claims of specialized knowledge, research, or news; and three, specificity. So here, let's just go through these elements. The tone was serious, and the side-by-side analysis of the photos from the client's perspective and editing shows, honestly, some amount of specialized knowledge. However, they aren't an expert in this. They're just a client, and they truly are just a lay person vocalizing their opinions and feelings over the editing. To me, this is very much videos in hyperbole and massively over-exaggerated and feeding off of the internet. But even if you satisfied those elements, say you did satisfy those elements and you were in like a California jurisdiction here analyzing defamation, and if this online social media speech is akin to defamation, specificity here is where the photographer could win, because statements made with specificity are also more likely to be considered statements of fact by a court. Notably, many of the cases where internet speech is considered specific and actionable involve business reviews on Yelp and other online messaging boards where customers may be misled or real economic consequences can be felt. But the photographer would have to be very specific in, I didn't get X client and damaged in X respect due to this person disclaiming all of this on social media or posting this bad review. You would have to have evidence to say that this caused me extreme economic harm to my business. Honestly, just fascinating, like a fascinating defamation analysis here. I could go on and on. I'm going to stop. I think that gives you guys a lot of insight into what is happening in the world of the online space and how defamation and slander are being interpreted by various courts and jurisdictions. And that's, of course, going to invite venue shopping by plaintiffs. They're going to want to bring their claim in a court that would side with their presentation of the facts. But as my federal court judge always said that I worked with and clerked for, the truth will come out. The truth, you cannot hide the truth. Yes, both parties are presenting their side and their opinions and interpreting case law, but an arbiter, a reasonable arbiter, whether that's a jury or a judge or a panel or, you go to arbitration or mediation, they are going to look at the facts and the truth of the matter. And you can't change the truth. You can't change the truth, and it'll always come out. Okay, so besides defamation, another question that I got is there any legitimate legal recourse from the client's standpoint? No, really, there isn't. There's no breach of contract that occurred. All photos were delivered. Performance was completed according to the contract from my perspective, from what I know at this point. Some people are saying, well, this could be false advertising. But again, that's so subjective regarding the editing style from the client's perspective. And honestly, to me, this is more of just a batch editing issue than not comporting to the photographer's style within her portfolio. Those seem to align really well. Next question. How do you handle if a client goes public to socials with either true or false information? Should you speak out or should you keep quiet? So from a PR standpoint, I know that it is always, always best to go public with your honest statement to get your side of the story out there. Legally, you may have a lawyer tell you differently, but I actually did just have a conversation with Miss Paige with her lawsuit with JLM Couture, and she went public with her side, even amidst a huge legal battle, and her lawyers were okay with it. She wasn't going to hire lawyers that weren't okay with her stating her side of the story online. And as long as she wasn't making false defamatory statements, then she was okay to say her truth. But as a service provider, the key here is to not get overly emotional or really get emotional at all. I want you to try and state only facts and not tell lies. Of course, that will get you in a defamation situation quickly. And then Molly McPherson has actually gone over this with the Kite Baby drama that went down on TikTok quite a few months ago. Molly McPherson is a PR expert. I'll link her in the show notes and description of this podcast episode. But I really like what she has said, that it is important to come out and acknowledge and take responsibility for what went on, but then also give facts regarding your side of the situation. Try to not be as scripted as you would like and try not to read from a teleprompter. I think that people can read through the lines there. But it is always best to, I think, respond as factual and professional and kindly as you can to say 1-star reviews, or to at least state your side of the story at some point in time to make sure that the public does have two varying sides of each coin here. Overall, my big takeaways from this whole Sepiagate thing. I feel like I haven't even said Sepiagate throughout this episode very much, but we talked about the sepia tone of the editing style at the beginning. But what can photographers learn? Firstly, photographers can ensure that they have everything they need to legally protect themselves and have backing in their contracts. Here are the list of clauses that you absolutely need to have in your wedding photography or elopement photography contracts to avoid situations like this and not only protect yourself as the photographer and service provider in your business practices, but to protect the client as well. First, an image processing, retouching, and edits clause. That heading could be different in your contract, but that's what we call it in all of our legal page contracts. And that one states this, that the photographer will only deliver high-resolution edited JPEG images to the clients and won't send original raw photos to the clients under any circumstance. And that can be changed. We have language in there that's like, unless agreed upon by all parties. And then your editing clause needs to go on and explain to the clients what would happen if they request additional cosmetic edits beyond the scope of your actual editing style. So it should say that you would enhance the images according to your artistic style as stated in section X of your contract, and you'll adjust to contrast and lighting and color, but that you probably won't change the inherent qualities of a person, and those would be considered cosmetic edits. And that if the client wants any cosmetic edits, that they would need to pay a fee of, say, X amount per hour of you doing additional editing, or amount per image if they require a ton of extensive edits to one image. Our editing clause in our contracts also state that the client must submit any editing requests to the photographer within X amount of time, usually like 30 days after delivery of the final gallery. And then thereafter, no cosmetic changes would be allowed so that the photographer doesn't have to go backwards. But remember, this is like the basis, the foundation. You can always change and accommodate clients to meet them where they are at, but this gives you at least a leg to stand on because it's in your contract. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I need to update my image processing and retouching and edits clause, I will link this a la carte clause in our podcast description for you so that you can go beef up this particular clause in your existing contract. I'm also going to link the following clauses that I'm going to talk about here. Next, an artistic style clause. Please have this clause in your contract. The biggest takeaway from Sepiagate is to have an artistic style clause in your contract. And an artistic style clause needs to state that the clients have spent a satisfactory amount of time reviewing the photographer's work and have a reasonable expectation that the images delivered will be in a similar manner and style as indicated in the photographer's portfolio, website, social media platforms. It also explains that photography and maybe videography and other, creative arts are a subjective art, and that the photographer has a unique vision with an ever-evolving style and technique. Of course, it's going to comport at least closely with the style presented, so there's no false advertising, but that the photographer has the final say regarding the aesthetic judgment and artistic quality of the images. That is what you're hiring the photographer for, and that dissatisfaction with aesthetic judgment or artistic ability is not valid reasons to terminate the agreement or request any monies returned. That's a big one here. You don't want to give your clients an argument or a reason for a partial or full refund. So that's the artistic style clause. I will link that one as well. Next two are just short and sweet: a photographer copyright clause and intellectual property clause. Of course, by default, you own the photographs, but you need to be explicitly clear in your contract that all photos taken by you as the photographer doing business as your business name, and all digital images are your property. So digital raw images are your property and then remain your property and your company's property and are protected by copyright law. And that they, as clients, waive any ownership, income, editorial control, commercial use of those images. So that's really important. You're giving them a personal license to use in your photography contracts. And that goes without saying that intellectual property clauses should be in your contract. But again, make sure you have very specific language to this effect. And then the final one that I wanted to point out that really came up for me as an attorney is a harassment clause. In the event that you as a photographer experience any threatening, harassment, hostile behavior from your clients during the course of performance of the contract or at the actual event. So what does a harassment clause do? It is really all about inappropriate, threatening, hostile, offensive behavior that is made from the client or the client's agent to you as the photographer or your agents, like your second shooter or your assistants at the event, or if the clients are doing any of this before the event, so while you are still in your contractual period. This clause is important because it allows you to terminate services immediately and or leave the event if it's happening in person, and that the agreement will be deemed terminated, and that you reserve the right as the photographer or service provider to retain all monies paid as liquidated damages, and that the clients agreed to relieve and hold you harmless as a result of incomplete services due to termination due to harassment. The final two big takeaways here are, one, as a photographer, as a videographer, as a service provider, even if you're a florist or a hairstylist, I want you to send your clients what they would expect in terms of delivered services to you prior to them booking and signing a contract. For photographers, that means send 3, 4, 5 full wedding galleries to clients. And in this situation, if you are photographing an elopement or a micro wedding or a destination wedding where you are photographing over the course of multiple days, send the full gallery so that they can see, okay, this is how the photographer shoots at a reception with on-camera flash and off-camera flash. And then also, this is what the photographer would shoot like in full sun or with overcast, or these are what family portraits are going to look like. This is what I can expect from my portraits, or just me and my spouse, what I can expect more candid, documentary style. You need to showcase this is your expectations and this is my artistic style prior to you booking with me so that there's just no confusion here. And then also, after you've done that and the clients are on board, hopefully, and they want you as their photographer, then please make sure to point out your artistic style clause in the email that you're sending to your clients. So instead of just, hey, this is my contract, sign on the bottom dotted line, make sure that you say, like, I'm so excited to work with you. I just wanted you to take an extra peek at these clauses in the contract to make sure that we're all on the same page. You're going to bullet point like 3 to 5 different clauses. And one of them, if you are very concerned about your artistic style being in question from your client, point out the artistic style clause. So again, you have multiple evidence and proof and documentation that you have shown them this is what they can expect so that they can't come back later on and say the opposite. And third, know that communication and trust are very, very important as a photographer and a service provider. And they're really the not so fun parts of running your business, but they're absolute musts. And then to wrap all of this up, a big takeaway, know that communication and education are the not so fun parts of running a service-based business, but it adds trust with your clients and ultimately customer service, and ultimately over-delivering on communication and educating your clients every step of the way through the process of working with you is going to help you avoid sticky situations like this 9.9 times out of 10. You're still going to get those lemons, but you know that you've done the best that you can in terms of conveying to them every aspect of your business practices and how this is going to go working with you. And I will end this episode with this. A TLP community member said to this effect, This is truly just a reminder to always, always be professional in your responses, even when you are delivering news that you know the client is going to be upset about. They will screenshot your response made in private and make it public. That is what we're seeing here. But by being professional and communicating the right way and educating them kindly, they will then come off as crazy while we present as reasonable. And I couldn't have said it better myself. Okay, that's my take on Sepiagate. That's my legal perspective. I hope you gleaned some insight from it. If you liked this episode, please share it on social media. Share it with some of your friends that would benefit from hearing this. Share it with some of your photographer friends that you know need to add things to their contract to make sure that they can avoid situations like this. If you want to leave me a review, I would greatly appreciate it on iTunes. And as always, please make sure that you're staying legally legit in your business. I will catch you in the next episode.